Hi, and welcome to the Vocal Fries Podcast, the podcast about linguistic discrimination.
I'm Carrie Gillen.
And I'm Megan Figueroa. Carrie, you just tweeted something amazing from our Vocal Fries Twitter.
It might be one of my favorite tweets of all time. So I don't know who this is, but someone tweeted about how they're in this all-day meeting and someone just didn't want to say, quote, get your shit together. And so he said, get your poop in a group.
Oh my God. And now I'm like... and now I'm like imagining if this were like a teleconference or something, like if you have like a little chat window or something, that he would have like used the poop emoji or something. Like that's all I'm imagining.
Oh my God. It is just such a disgusting image.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So yeah, it's just evidence that sometimes avoiding swearing is the wrong tactic.
Yeah, and I can't even see, like, I mean, get your shit together could be offensive, but it can be said where it's like kind of funny or kind of like whimsical, where you're like, okay, we need to get our shit together, let's work on this, right? So it's not like it would have been, I don't know.
I can see that how it might be inappropriate for some people just because they're maybe very religious, but
yeah,
maybe you need a different turn of phrase then that does not invoke feces.
Yeah, I guess like get your poop in a group. It's just like being a kid when you say HE double hockey sticks. Like I remember like saying that as a kid. Get your poop in a group is almost like childlike for me.
It is actually. It's very kid-like.
Yeah.
Which is also weird.
It is weird. But kids talk about poop all the time. So.
And now apparently so do we.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
Apologies to those who find this disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, I used to not use the poop emoji at all, and now I do. So it's really growth in the area of feces for me. So.
Nice. Well, on that disturbing note, I had a dream a couple nights ago that the world was completely ending, that there were nuclear bombs just killing us all, and I woke up terrified.
Well, and then I woke up terrified today thinking that I'm going to die from the flu now. So...
It is a bad one this year.
Yeah, so nuclear war, the flu, everything is a pile of shit.
A pile of poop in a group.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, either we'll die from like a nuclear blast or maybe from the flu. That's something to look forward to.
I mean, you have to die some way.
It's true.
Might as well be in a conflagration, I guess.
Well, I don't know. Let's hope that the flu shot helps me a little.
Well, it does. I mean, okay, I am not an immunologist, but
yeah,
they do say, the experts do say that if you get the flu shot, even if it's not that well targeted to the flu of this particular year, it still confers some protection. Yeah. So it is still a good idea. Even if you don't think you need it as an adult, just think about if you're around any children or older people. Apparently like 30 babies have died from this flu in the United States. Yeah.
No, I mean, I work with kids, so I definitely get it for them as well. But also those little shits are the ones that are giving me like everything.
Yeah, I have to say that one of the things I definitely do not miss about being in the classroom is I haven't gotten the flu in the last 2 winters. Yeah. And I think it's because I'm not around students anymore. And they're, adults, but...
I mean, it's a cesspool. Universities are cesspools, so... Well.
Yes.
Oh, so we have a couple of housekeeping things, right?
Yeah, so a reminder that we have a Patreon now, and if you subscribe at the $5 level, you're going to get access to our bonus episodes, and we're recording our first real bonus episode after this. So
yes,
it should be up fairly soon, before the end of January, and I'm not sure when this episode is going to be coming out, but
yeah, February probably. So it's going to be.
So probably, yes, the first bonus episode will be out sometime in January. So yeah, if you want access to the bonus episodes, that would be your option.
Yes.
And if you don't want that, if you just want to support us, you can support us at the $1 level, or if you want a sticker, the $3 level.
And
you also get the sticker at the $5 level.
Yeah, the sticker is very cute. It is the fries. It's, I mean, which is the best logo ever. And I always get compliments for that, at least. And
yeah, me too.
And then they'll say they actually like the podcast too.
It's okay if you like the design better than the podcast.
Yeah, it's really good. So
it's very cute, and thanks, Chris, for doing that for us.
Yes, thank you. So we have another interview today, and I just want to say that we have met so many amazing, cool people through our interviews. So I'm just really excited about this one. I think everyone's gonna really learn a lot and like it.
Me too.
Yeah.
So I want to say also that I find it's really fun to talk to people. Some of the people I already knew in real life, like my friend Nicole, my friend Peter. Mm-hmm. Many I didn't know, and including Kirby, who we are interviewing today. So
yeah. So here,
it's exciting.
Yeah. So here we go. All right, so today we're excited to welcome our guest, Kirby Conrod. Kirby is a fourth-year doctoral student focusing on syntax, in particular pronouns. They have a secondary interest in the sociolinguistics of gender, especially as it relates to gender and LGBTQ plus identities. Kirby uses they/them pronouns. Welcome, Kirby.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Hi, Kirby. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah. And I realize this now, Carrie, is that we've never said our pronouns on the air.
That's true.
Ooh, that'd be great.
Yeah. So she, her. I think we've referred to each other as that, but it's definitely a good practice to tell people.
Yeah, and I'm also she, her. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So that's awesome. Okay. So I want to start off with asking you, Kirby, a little bit about your research, because I think it's cool that you're kind of like a syntactician, sociolinguistic person. That like doesn't go together a lot, and I love it.
Yeah, so I'm very interdisciplinary. I had to get two advisors because it's true that most sociolinguists don't do syntax, and most syntacticians don't do socio. So I am looking at sort of complicating the way that we do formal syntax. I was trained as a formal syntactician in undergrad and most of my early grad education. And what kept coming up for me is this stuff where, formal syntax will sort of make assumptions about the world that aren't necessarily true. So this is the sort of thing where constantly, in intro textbooks, you'll see something marked as ungrammatical where it says, John loves herself. And there's a lot of social assumptions going into calling something like that ungrammatical. So one of the things that I'm interested in doing is sort of taking apart some of those assumptions and reworking the syntax in a way that reflects the way people are actually using things like pronouns to reflect their social realities. So I am hoping to, get a good syntax explanation for what's going on in the social world.
Cool. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, and it's obviously relevant to a lot of people. It's always been relevant to a lot of people, but I think that mainstream, like pop, like science stuff is actually really interested in that right now as well. There seems to be a movement to be interested in that. So could we start with, let's pretend that I forgot everything about syntax, because
sure.
Yeah, I mean we might have listeners that don't know anything about syntax. In fact, we do. So let's start off with, will you tell us a little bit about English third person pronouns?
Sure. So English third person pronouns, the singular ones are she, he, and for some people, they, and then it for things that aren't people. So third person means that you're not talking about yourself and you're not talking about the person that you're talking to. So it's somebody that's outside of the conversation, and they may be standing right there, or they may not even be in the room. And the way that third person pronouns get meaning is from an antecedent. So that means that either they get meaning from something that you said earlier in the conversation, like a name, or they get meaning from the world knowledge that people have, where they know who you're talking about because they understand what's going on. if, me and my friend who are huge Lady Gaga fans are talking to each other, and I suddenly, see a thing on my phone and I say, oh my God, she dropped a new album. That's something where the word she would be ambiguous to anybody else, but to my friend who shares this interest with me, they know who I'm talking about. This is a hypothetical example.
Perfect.
So pronouns are, the idea is that they're kind of placeholders for not having to say names over and over again. And they get their meaning from names or from other sort of referring expressions.
Cool.
Yeah, and with English third person singular pronouns, there's grammatical gender involved.
So it's not grammatical gender.
Oh, sorry,
this is one of the
yeah.
things that I mean, I'm happy to talk about the difference here because it's important. Grammatical gender is for languages like Spanish or French or Italian or German, where all the nouns have certain endings that you have to match your demonstratives and adjectives with, where it's essentially a noun class. And the reason it gets called gender is because it tends to roughly line up with genders like male and female. But imagine, giving male and female genders to everything in the world, like tables and chairs and books and such. So grammatical gender is the gender of tables and chairs and books and stuff, where we're not really saying that books are female. What we're saying is that books have certain morphological properties that want a certain kind of agreement. That's not exactly the same as sort of real world gender. And there's a bunch of different names for real world gender. So one of the things is that we want to be able to account for this kind of tables and chairs need certain flavors of adjectives to go with them in the syntax when we're describing how words go together and what parts of words need to go together. But the fact that the same thing happens for reflecting real world people and real world genders sort of complicates it, because when you get into real world genders, it's not just a noun class. It's this whole social relationship. It's sensitive to context, and it can change from place to place and time to time. So it gets much more complicated when we're talking about the gender of actual human beings.
Should we start talking about like trans issues or?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Well, I wonder if I could say this because you said something on Twitter, and I just wanted to like say it as a question because I thought it was really important.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so why is it important that trans linguists are the ones doing the work on trans language?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. On the one hand, I don't necessarily want to tell people not to research trans language because it's so interesting. But on the other hand, for me and other trans linguists, what's at stake in the research is really personal and really urgent.
Right.
And there are certain sort of concerns that I don't see cis linguists respecting. And it's not a matter of necessarily doing unethical research, but not doing research in a way that really treats the trans subjects as real human people instead of guinea pigs. But the other important thing that I think distinguishes research from trans researchers is that, frankly, our research questions are more interesting. When I see research on, for example, trans women's phonetics and sociophonetics from cisgender men, it's almost always the research question is, how well does this trans woman pass?
Yeah.
And to trans people, that question is A, not very interesting, and B, kind of insulting.
Yeah, right.
Where that's the only thing that people are asking over and over is, what do cis people think of trans women's voices? And like, isn't it, sort of interesting how trans women don't really sound like women? Like, that's not something that we want to see on paper over and over. We want to see trans women studied in comparison to trans women. We want to see trans women leading the research on trans women, because it's, for one thing, it's just not happening. There are, as far as I know, no trans women in sociophonetics. And this is a real problem, because sociophonetics is sort of the place where people are trying to sort out what is sex and what is gender when it comes to the voice. We've been conflating those things for a really long time, where we assume that, certain things are due to this sort of amalgam of sex and gender, where some things are just sort of biologically due to being a woman, whatever that means. And the more we look into it, the more it looks like that's just not true. And the other thing is that some things that are sort of biologically determined by, the length of your vocal folds, doesn't necessarily tell people socially that you're a woman. And there are other qualities that tell people socially that you're a woman. And so looking at how people negotiate that when they are assigned male at birth and have longer vocal folds and have a lower sort of basic pitch, but can still convey that they are women through their voice, that's very interesting to look at as in its own right, without comparing them to cis women.
Right.
And can you real quickly define cis for our listeners, just in case? Yeah.
So cis is CIS. I have seen the sort of folk etymology that it's an acronym. It's not. It just means on the same side of. It's the opposite of trans. So when I use cis as an abbreviation, I'm using it in the same way that I use trans as an abbreviation. So cisgender just means that your gender identity aligns with your assigned sex at birth.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so speaking of all of this, like misgendering, there's also something called dead naming, and you can talk more about it or tell us what it is. I don't want to define it in case I get it wrong, but I want to remind everyone that it's possible for linguists to be linguistic assholes. And that actually happened recently on Language Log, which is a blog about linguistics where a very established linguist, Jeff Pullum, broke the cardinal rule and was a complete asshole.
This is not unprecedented for him, as many linguists are excited to tell me every time it comes up.
Yeah, he's kind of known for being an asshole, actually.
Is that his thing?
Like curmudgeonly, at least, the very, very least.
Yeah. So not only did he misgender someone, but he also dead named a former student. So can you tell us a little bit about what dead naming is and why this is so fucked up?
Yeah, so dead naming is a very visceral name, and it's using the name for somebody that they no longer use. And for trans people, this is very sensitive. In some ways, it's a safety issue of, if I no longer use my name that my parents gave me at work and somebody uses that name for me in front of my colleagues, you're potentially outing me as trans in a way that, no, it's not legal in Washington state for people to fire me for being trans, but that is not going to stop them. This is something that happens all the time. And so using a dead name or a name that somebody is not using anymore can potentially put them in material danger. And the other thing is that it's psychologically very damaging. For trans people who choose new names, your new name is an important part of building an identity that's under your control, that doesn't feel like it fits wrong. When trans people choose their new names, it's something, I know a lot of them go through a couple names before they sort of settle on one. And it's something very, very personal. Your name is so personal. And being called the one that you don't want to be called is basically saying to you, I don't care what you think you are. I know what you are. And it's the most disrespectful way to refer to somebody. And doing it in front of someone is awful. It has a huge psychological effect. Doing it behind their back is immensely disrespectful. Because now what you're doing is you're telling other people with whom this person is acquainted, I don't care what that person thinks they are. I know what they are.
You know what this reminds me of a little bit is when people use slurs. It's like very disrespectful, and it actually just means that you're the asshole.
Yeah, I don't know that I want to exactly compare these because I think these are similar in effect, but names are so personal, the same name is not going to affect everybody the same way. But
that's true.
One person's dead name may be another person's chosen name. So it's not like the name itself is what carries the meaning. It's knowing that you're using the wrong one.
Right. Well, I guess in a similar way, a slur is not always bad if you're in the in group. It's okay. So it's not the word itself; it's who's using it. So that's the comparison to me. But anyway,
Yeah. And the same can be said about misgendering. Is that fair?
Yeah. So I am hesitant to say that misgendering is exactly like a slur because, on the one hand, it definitely can be used that way. One of my sort of early Twitter studies was about the way that people were tweeting about. I wanted to use sort of a famous trans person, and this was almost exactly a year ago. So it was right when Chelsea Manning got her sentence commuted. And so a lot of people were talking about her on Twitter. And so what I was curious about is something that I was seeing is that, people who really, really violently hated her, are tweeting death threats at her, sometimes still called her Chelsea, but were using he. So this was really interesting to me. So dead naming and misgendering are a little bit different linguistically, and that's because names and pronouns are a little bit different linguistically. So you can use dead naming or misgendering to accomplish the same effect, which is, threatening a trans woman's life, but the sort of the grammatical constraints on pronouns are a little bit stricter. So I pulled a whole bunch of tweets talking about Chelsea Manning and using her name and her, and different pronouns about her. And I compared, who is using her chosen name versus who is using her dead name, and who is using he versus who is using she. There was also some people using it. I didn't include that data because it made me sick to my stomach.
Yeah.
So that, that's a separate project that I need a lot more therapy before I can do.
Right.
But what I found was more people were using her chosen name even when they were still misgendering her.
it's really interesting.
So people were calling her Chelsea and he. So one of the conclusions I kind of drew from that is that the difference between a name and a pronoun is that a name is a lexical item. It's sort of a real contentful word with real semantic sort of weight to it. A pronoun is a grammatical word. So changing grammatical words happens a little bit slower, and people report more difficulty with it. This is something that Jeff Pullum reported when he was, busy misgendering this poor person in a news article, where he, reported, I find it really ungrammatical to use this person's chosen pronoun, which is singular they, with their name. People don't report using the wrong name as feeling ungrammatical. Only the pronouns. So the difference between names and pronouns is that pronouns are more deeply embedded in the structure of how our language works. They're more one of the sort of fundamental building blocks of syntax. Whereas names are, there are hundreds, thousands of names that we have to learn every day, and we're always encountering new ones, and they have unique meanings, and they are not sort of structurally sensitive in the way pronouns are. But it's true that using a dead name and using the wrong pronoun can accomplish the same effect, which is that you can be really, really transphobic on Twitter.
Thank you for sharing some of your research. I wanted to bring up the Chelsea Manning stuff, so I'm glad I got in there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Yeah. So along with that, in response to Jeff, you shared an article on Medium, and you said something that is so perfect and beautiful. You said, quote, "I am absolutely being prescriptive here, the same way it is technically prescriptive to tell you not to use racial slurs. I am prescribing basic respect." I really, really appreciated that you said that, and I think it goes along with what we're trying to do with the vocal fries.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was awesome. And since misgendering causes real harm, I noticed that you have another article on Medium that is basically a quick primer on how to respect someone's pronouns. Will you share the steps with us here? And we'll also link to it.
Oh, yeah. So I would love more people to know about this. I want this, handed out on little index cards to everybody. When people are having a hard time switching pronouns, they report, sort of grammatical problems. And they'll use this like, oh, it's ungrammatical for me, or it feels grammatically wrong as a way of sort of excusing misgendering, their friends and loved ones. And so I basically wrote this guide as like a subtweet at my parents, who are now trying a little harder. So the first thing I said is, slow down. This is the easiest one, and it's also the one that people get the maddest about. People get really, really mad when you tell them to slow down, but I think it's not unreasonable to say, think before you speak. It's not that big an ask, And so slow down, plan your speech, think about what you were going to say. And what this may mean is that you talk a little slower for a while, and it may be frustrating to you, and I'm going to tell you tough shit.
Yeah.
If, misgendering is so deeply embedded in your language that you seriously can't get rid of it without really slowing down, then what you need to do is really slow down and just get over it. The next thing that I tell people, and this is one that is something that people think they do, but they super don't. So if somebody corrects you on their pronouns, you have to stop talking and listen to the correction. So this happens to me constantly. And I think it's something to do with how people negotiate turn taking in conversation, where if somebody's in the middle of a long sentence and they misgender me, I will just quickly sort of blurt out they. It's like an instinct for me. I kind of can't stop myself. And I'll do it when I was sort of first testing out these pronouns, especially in professional contexts, I was sort of timid and quiet, and I didn't do it all the time. I'm much more rude and loud about it now, and it's helping. So trans people out there, I suggest being rude. But I can't tell you how many times I've done this where somebody is talking and I very loudly say as they're talking, they. And they keep talking as if they have not heard me. And in fact, sometimes when they stop talking, I say, you used she, did you mean she? And they said, oh, I had no idea. Like, they really don't hear me when they're talking. So this is something that cis people need to work on, is if somebody is trying to correct you, you need to let them correct you. And if you are actually trying to do a better job, this shouldn't be something that you are stamping your feet about. Is, if you're corrected, you have to actually let people interrupt you. And it means stepping down and being a little bit more humble and careful. But it's important. And then the other thing is that I have a lot of people who say, I'll try, but, correct me if I get it wrong. And then when I correct them, they don't acknowledge it at all. So if you ask for corrections, you should be trying even harder to listen to them. The third thing I say is one that I think, Jeff Pullum in particular needs to listen to. And it's don't make excuses. So if you are friends, colleagues, family with a trans person, even if their pronouns are hard for you, you telling me how hard my pronouns are for me doesn't help me in any way. I hear it from everybody all the time, and it sounds like you're trying to get out of it. It sounds like you're trying to weasel your way out of a homework assignment that you don't want to do. And I'm a TA. I don't like hearing this. So, but trying to make excuses for yourself to make up for mistakes that you're going to make in the future. On the one hand, I can understand why you're trying to do this, if you're trying to convey oh, I'm not transphobic, it's just that I have this problem. But the effect is the same.
Yeah. People are really obsessed with intentions. Intentions matter more than anything. And I don't want to say they don't matter at all, but you can't say they matter more than anything else. That's completely unfair.
Yeah. Somebody just telling me I'm not transphobic, therefore I'm going to refuse to use your correct pronouns is oh, so you're just going to talk exactly like transphobes do.
Yeah.
Right.
But you're not transphobic, so I'm not allowed to be mad at you.
Yeah.
And so the thing about don't make excuses is that what I'm hearing is don't be mad at me for sucking really bad.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's fair. I think I'm allowed to be mad at you.
Yeah.
And that anger is not coming out of I'm offended or you're being politically incorrect. That anger is coming out of you're hurting me. You're hurting my feelings. Yeah. This is personal.
Yeah. And you should know that you're hurting someone's feelings. You've told them.
Right. And if you don't care, you're being an asshole or a sociopath. So
if you don't care, you don't get to claim that you do care. And if you do care, you have to try harder.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
And then my last tip is that if you hear yourself mess up, correct yourself briefly and don't make a big deal out of it. So I cannot stand when I'm trying to have a normal conversation, someone slips out she, and then stops everything that we're doing to be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I've been trying so hard, but it's so hard for me. It's just so weird and wrong. And I'm having, and I just need to. And it's like, and now the conversation is about you sucking at pronouns rather than the normal conversation that we were having before. If you mess up, correct yourself briefly and move on.
Yeah, instead of asking someone to do emotional labor for you, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is something that just, I can't stand it when people make a huge deal out of it to the point where I have to comfort them about their mistake.
Right, yeah.
And you do have to correct yourself. If you hear yourself mess up and just keep going without doing anything, and then, you come up to me like an hour later and say, oh, I messed up, I'm so sorry. It's like a little late then, because everybody else in the room heard you say the wrong thing. And that's, reinforcing to them that that's the thing to say.
Yeah.
And so this is something that it really frustrates me when especially faculty do this, because there's this power imbalance, right? I'm a grad student and they're a professor, so I don't get to tell them what to do. But on the other hand, people are following their example. So if a professor misgenders me in front of some undergrads in a class that I'm TAing, that is teaching the undergrads that it's okay to call me the wrong thing.
Right.
And not acknowledging it in the moment is telling everybody in the room that it's not that big a deal. And it drives me crazy. So, correct yourself in the moment, but don't derail the conversation to do so.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, and I really loved those tips. And so I'm glad that we can help get them out on the way that we can help get them out through the Vocal Fries, but we will link to it, obviously. We'll tweet about it. And so thank you for sharing that with us.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing it up.
So I'd actually like to talk about they a little bit more in detail, because I think it is kind of interesting. So you have this abstract that you sent to us about changes in singular they, and just the difference in ages. So people in their 20s are using singular they way more than people in any of the other age groups, according to this.
Yeah. And impressionistically, if you think about it, if you think about who you know and who's doing it, it's true, right? You know this to be true. Like, that it's people under 30 right now who are doing this thing and are not finding it ungrammatical. And so what we sociolinguists like to call that is a change in progress. And it's a very steep one. There's a huge difference between people under 30 and people over 30. And so part of that might be, the number of subjects I have and stuff like this. And, I have to do more math, but it really looks like there's this like sudden cutoff around, whatever birth year it is, 1988, I guess. Where people under that age are fine with it and people over that age struggle with it. And part of the interesting thing about this data that I'm talking about is that this is not me asking people to tell me if it's grammatical. I'm not asking them to think about it. This is data about people using it naturally in a normal conversation. So this is not only is it grammatical for them, but it is an organic and ordinary part of their language. And I think that's really important to drive home, is that this is not a big deal for the people who have this part of the grammar, for the people who are leading this language change. It's not a big deal. It's not something that they're thinking about. It's not something that they're doing on purpose. It's not something that they've decided to be politically correct about. It's just a part of their ordinary unconscious language use. And that's the future. That's going to be normal in 10 years, 20 years. It's on its way to normal now. And so I think that's something that, for me, it makes me feel really hopeful that there's going to be serious change and that the generations that come after this are not going to have this fight.
I hope so.
Because the language is on its way to changing.
I mean, for me, singular they is totally acceptable. I've always used it, and I'm in my 40s. But I think the people in their 20s are using it probably a lot more in a lot more context than I am, I'm guessing.
Yeah. So one of the things that probably is affecting this is how many non-binary people do you personally know?
Right.
So this is something that Lauren Ackerman's work is looking at is, how many non-binary people you personally know does affect how you feel about this variable, this use of a pronoun. And one of the other things about the sort of stark difference between people in their 20s and the rest of my subjects is that the people in their 20s probably know a lot more non-binary people. And knowing non-binary people gives you occasion to talk about them. In these conversations that we were having in my sociolinguistic interview, we're talking about, what mutual friends do you have? I'm interviewing people in pairs, so I'm having conversation with two people at once, and I'm asking, tell me about your mutual friends. Tell me a fun story of like a time you shared together. And this is something where they're using they because they is a normal part of their social landscape. They're using they because they need it to reflect the identities of the people they know and hang out with and like and want to talk about. And this is one of the ways that I think that, syntacticians who don't go out and listen to real social language aren't going to pick up on, because they're not hearing the way that language changes to adapt to its environment. And so in this case, the environment is having a lot of non-binary friends, and the way that language will adapt is like, I guess this is fine now. And whatever grammatical changes have to happen in my brain to make it fine, they will just happen.
Right. And also you point out that that gender identity also affects the use of this. So obviously non-binary people are going to use they more often, but women seem to use it a lot more than men do.
Yeah, so there are a couple reasons that this might be the case. The first reason is that so women using a sort of innovative form of language more than men is not uncommon, and sociolinguists have a lot of different theories about why this may be, having to do with sort of social capital and using new language to show that you have sort of social worth. So that's, one theory about why women are further ahead in a language change than men. But I think the fact that non-binary people are even further ahead shows a couple things. One, people are aware of this change. This is not happening unconsciously, and non-binary people have a lot at stake in this change. So it makes a lot of sense that they would be further along in just using it. Two, non-binary people probably have more non-binary friends, and so they're just using it because all their friends, I personally have at least 6, which is a lot more than most people. Can you, do you personally know, and are you personally close with more than 2 non-binary people?
Being personally close, I guess not.
I'm not.
No.
Yeah, it's not that common right now. So obviously non-binary people like to hang out with other non-binary people because they get us, and they are not dicks to us all the time.
Yeah, which is completely understandable.
Yeah, so, it's the sort of thing where, social network is definitely going to be a factor here. But it may also be the case that sociolinguists have to start making room for other genders in our studies. And not only that, I think sociolinguists need to start actively recruiting other genders. Because as far as I know, no published journal article has an other category with more than 1 or 2 participants. And that to me is saying that we just don't know or care about these populations. And I think that doesn't make any sense. I think that this sort of the membership of non-binary people is going to only grow over time. And I think that having space in our research for talking about what are non-binary people doing compared to other people is going to be interesting and fruitful.
Definitely.
One last point to be made about singular they, I think, is it's actually kind of old. Maybe not so much in all the uses of it, but for example, like everyone loves their mother instead of everyone loves his or her mother. Like that's what most people use. And so people do have singular they, even if, most people have singular they, even if they think they don't.
Yeah.
And that's why it's also, if the, you know, I agree that that's the case. That's why I also agree it's, if you're arguing against this change, you're just being a fucking asshole.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So arguing against this change, I think I don't want to have a whole podcast about how Jeff Pollitt is an asshole, but here's the thing.
Neither do I, but it is what it is.
He and others like him. So, I hesitate to like bring up examples in my personal life, but he is not the first old man I've met who has had this exact argument with me. This is just the most public argument that I've had to this effect. But arguing against the change is different than saying I'm not a member of the leading force of this change. And that's okay. It's okay to say I am a speaker of a more conservative dialect. It really sounds weird to me. It's not okay to say, therefore, it's fine for me to misgender people in print. Having grammatical difficulties is a different thing than misgendering someone in print.
Yeah. Yeah, because you have time to think about it and to fix it.
Yeah, you have time to think about it and to fix it. And my sort of Medium post about how to be better is, if you have time to A, give yourself time to think about it, and B, fix it if you can. And that's where these people are messing up, is not that they're having difficulties, it's that they're not putting even the minimal effort into being respectful despite their difficulties.
Right. Exactly. And that's, I think, a good point, because we don't want to scare our listeners and say, like, you are going to fuck up and you're terrible. It's more like, you're going to fuck up, but please, like, be respectful and follow the tips that you shared. Like, don't make a big deal about it.
Yeah, I definitely have fucked up on this score. Yeah. I misgendered somebody once. And, I apologized and used the correct pronoun. It's really not that hard.
Yeah. Right.
And I think the most important thing is that people need to not get defensive about it. And that defensive-ness comes out of this place of insecurity of, like, if I mess up and you call me out on it, you're, saying that I'm unhip or I can't possibly be, friends with you or something like that. That sort of social fear of, like, you're going to stop being friends with me because I messed up once. Like, that's not the case. But if you're messing up over and over again and clearly not trying to fix it, then it's like, well, all right.
Yeah.
What are you doing here? Yeah. So messing up and fixing it is infinitely preferable to arguing with me about why you should be excused.
Right. Yes.
Good point.
Yes. And that applies to, like, everything in life, really, right? Come on. Was there anything else, Carrie, that you can think of, or Kirby, that you want to say that we've missed, that we kind of glossed over or didn't bring up before we wrap up?
I don't have anything more, so.
I think this was really good. P.S.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah, can I give some shout outs to other research that I think is important?
Yes.
So Lauren Ackerman was just featured this morning in an article in The Economist for her work on singular they. She's working on more of sort of the processing side. So she's looking at how people deal with singular they when it's used to them. And this is important work in sort of figuring out, who is it grammatical for? Who is it not grammatical for? Because the way that we process sentences shows what's going on in our brain and what we're okay with. And that's really important. And then the other linguist that I want to do a shout out to is Lex Connolly, who's not only looking at sort of the naturalistic use of singular they, but also other non-binary uses of language in other languages. So I think that their work is also really important to look at. They're also a grad student, so they're sort of in the same spot of me of like, there's stuff forthcoming very soon. So those are the researchers that I really want people to know about with pronouns. I want people to pay attention to the research on this before making declarations about what's going on, A. And at B, I want people to support non-binary researchers who are researching this, because, we've what's the idiom? We've got skin in the game.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This matters for us.
Yeah.
this matters. This matters for me personally. I'm researching this because I spent my whole first year at grad school wondering, why are some professors really, really good at gendering me correctly, and some professors have never gotten it right even once? And this is a really personal question for me. And, there's clearly something going on. So looking at the language science of what's going on is going to be really important in the next few years. And I want people to prioritize translinguists who are doing that.
And of course, the Vocal Fries will be happy to tweet any of your tweets that tell us about your new research that's coming out.
You.
So we'll be looking for that.
And we'll also add all that information that you just gave on our Tumblr.
Oh, thank you.
We were so happy to have you, Kirby.
Yes, thank you so much.
And for our listeners, you can find them on Twitter and on Medium. So again, we will link to all of that.
Great. Thanks so much. And thanks so much for having me. This was really fun.
It was. Thank you.
Yay.
All right. Don't be an asshole.
Do not be an asshole. Kirby, would you like to also say that?
Yeah, don't be an asshole.
Okay, bye.
All right. Bye.
All dressed up, I know where to go. Walking the streets all alone. Another night to wish that you could forget. Making yourself up as you go along. Who's gonna take you home tonight? Who's gonna take you home? Who's gonna take you home tonight? Who's gonna take you home? Does God bless your transsexual hearts? True trans or rebel.
The Vocal Fries podcast is produced by Chris Ayers for Halftone Audio. Theme music by Nick Granum. You can find us on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Vocal Fries Pod. You can email us at vocalfriespod@gmail.com.